fascia tissue basically between dermis and muscle. You eject the chip from the tube and it just lays there. You remove the needle and now you just put a band-aid over it and you're done, right? So that incision site is just like a needle prick basically, comparatively to like putting something through and hanging a piece of metal. Um, and then after it heals, even just getting a scab on it a few hours later, your risk of infection goes to almost nothing.
Welcome, everyone, to the What the Biohack podcast, powered by Bronic, which aims to discover what the heck security means to biology. We interview some of the world's mad scientists and rad hackers across deceivingly unrelated disciplines to uncover what the future holds and how we can design against crime. My name is Dr. Mary Gabri, your host, and today we're speaking with Amal Graafstra, who is CEO of Dangerous Things and Vivokey, a biohacking company based out of Seattle. He's a biohacker, technologist, author, double RFID, and much, much more. Welcome, Amal.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Looking forward to having a chat. I know that we talked early on in kind of Bronic's nascent stages, and now I'm excited to kind of see what's coming of that. So, yeah.
Awesome to have you. I'm super excited. And as we were talking about this earlier, we have loads of questions for you. So, for our listeners, I think it's worth starting at the very, very beginning and perhaps just explaining what biohacking is.
Oh, sure. So in the beginning, there was nothing, and then, but anyway, yeah. So in my beginning of this whole thing, it was really about not really biohacking. I mean, that term didn't really actually exist, to be honest. So in 2005, I was working in a medical office in a basement and getting very agitated with the massive jailer's keyring that I had for all the different doors. And then I had different facilities that I also maintained IT for. So I had just an ungodly amount of keys, and I was working late, and I was trying to get in and out of these doors. And in my office, I had a door right behind me that was like a emergency egress door, right? And so the official door to go in and out of was like upstairs, and there was alarm systems at night and all this. And so I would just go in and out this emergency door. But there was no way to leave it unlocked. It was always locked. And so if you didn't have your keys and you went outside, you'd have to go around the other way and whatever. And yeah, so too many late nights, I walked out and the door closed, and I went, and then I had to call somebody, and they were really not happy. And so I was like, man, I just wish the door knew it was me. There was some way for it to just understand that I'm allowed through the door, or just whatever. And so I looked at like fingerprint scanners and iris scanners and that kind of thing. And it was pretty clunky and expensive back then. And still today, it's kind of that way, particularly for outdoor devices, right? So RFID, on the other hand, the badge thing where you just tap, boop, it opens the door. Very robust, very cheap, very appropriate in my use case. But it didn't really solve my problem because I was managing a card instead of a metal key. Like, it was the same concept, it's just different technology. And so I kind of was bummed out. But then I thought, man, these cats and dogs are getting these implants. That's RFID technology. Why not me, right? Like, this is dumb. So I looked into it, and I ended up not getting a pet chip because of different protocols and whatever. But there were these very common, very easy to work with RF protocols for passive RFID transponders that also came in this form factor of a injectable, microchip. And so I called these companies that made the chips, and I said, "Do you make one with this specific EM4102 chip?" And they said, "Yeah, it's in the glass that is used for pets and animals. Yeah, but don't put it in an animal." And I said, "Oh, why?" And they said, "Well, the RF protocol is not right. It won't read with the scanner that the vet has." I'm like, "Oh, well, that's not the issue. Send me some." And so then they sent some samples, and by the time they arrived, I already talked to multiple doctors who were clients of mine at the time, and talked to and built an access control system for the door. And so the doc that was in charge of the building was like, "Yeah, no problem, put it in." And I was beeping away, right? So at the time, they really didn't have anything to do with biohacking, but over time, then the maker movement started up. The disposable kind of consumeristic approach of the 80s had given way to, making things in your garage again and trying things out and building projects. And so in 2007, I wrote a book, RFID Toys, to kind of address that growing interest again. And it was a little bit ahead of its time, I think, because it was really 2013 where things kicked off. And that was where DIY bio was happening. People were getting into looking into genetics in the lab, like in small single person labs, even like looking at how to do gene editing and things like that. It was pre-CRISPR, but still just looking at how genes work and could you even do like programmable machines with biology and DNA and doing synthetic DNA where you're building your own DNA sequences. These were all technologies that were coming to the fore, along with all this at the same time, all these DIY and open source hardware projects like Arduino and all this kind of stuff. So it merged together in this really cool way where biohacking kind of emerged as a term to cover, I think at first, these kind of small labs. So these small, 1-2 person or small group labs where they were kind of spinning out of schools and universities or just kind of organically being created in people's garages to experiment with biology. And that's either like, forced evolution kits or, like reactors, bioreactors, or whatever they were doing. But then also we had these kind of the rise of what I would say like lifestyle hacking, kind of like the bulletproof coffee and the, meditation on a mountaintop with the cold, whatever, cold baths or whatever, like all these kind of lifestyle hacks that were also kind of coming to the fore. And they'd already existed for a long time, but they started to coalesce under this banner of biohacking. And so if you talk to somebody about what is biohacking, they might say, oh, it's meditating with bulletproof coffee and doing whatever ketones, or whatever. Or you talk to somebody, it's like, oh, it's editing biomes and like creating synthetic biology. And then you talk to somebody like me and I'm like, oh, it's improving our biology with through implantation of technology, right? So there's these different silos that kind of fall under biohacking, but ultimately I think they kind of come down and coalesce under the banner of the goal, which is like transhumanism, right? Like it's improving the human condition fundamentally by using technology, and that technology can impact these different areas differently. So yeah, the biohacking is at the moment it's an umbrella term that means many things to many people.
Very kind of broad or wide stratification, I think, with the term. And so I watched your TEDx talk, which I really enjoyed. And I think it did, correct me if I'm wrong, it came out right after you published your book, which we should say to all our listeners that we'll have the link to the Amazon link to purchase the book, which is kind of like a manual for biohacking implantables, right?
Well, actually, no. So that was a very specific thing that the company said they didn't want in the book. because I had gotten kind of media coverage. For doing the implants, so 2005, and then toward the end of the year, some friends of mine saw what I was doing, and then they posted it on a blog, and then it kind of exploded, and we got all this media coverage. And then Wiley Publishing came in and said, "Oh, you're dealing with RFID. Let's do a book about it, but we don't really want the implant stuff in it because it's too controversial, right?" Like this was 2006 when they kind of were talking to me about it. So they said, "We just want a book for RFID enthusiasts to be able to integrate RFID technology into their hobby projects, right, at home. So their hobbyist electronics projects." I said, "Oh yeah, that's totally fine. We could do that." So I have like half a page that talks in the back about the implant, right? If you want to get an implant, this is possible. And so they were still a little bit like, I don't know if we should do that. I'm like, it'll be all right. I mean, they could see, anybody would be able to find this online that this is what I've done. So they let it be in there. But it was kind of funny. Like they found me because of the hype around the implant, but then they were like specifically like, no, don't put it in there. Those books can be about like how to use RFID technologies in home hobbyist electronics projects. So that's what it's about. And I'd say a lot of the information in the book is probably, it's out of print, so you can buy a secondhand on Amazon for sure. but yeah, it never, like I said, it was a little bit ahead of its time because electronics projects were still like like
Mm.
Arduino time frame where they were still kind of coming. But um, what ultimately pushed me to starting Dangerous Things was between 2007 when it was published and 2013, that momentum grew. And by the time it was 2012, 2013, I was just getting deluged with emails. Like people are like, hey, I got your book, even though it was already out of print. Got your book, and I heard what you did with the implants. I really want to get an implant. How do I do it? And so I was like, man, this is a lot. And so I had to figure out a way to either put a business model around it to make it worthwhile, or ignore it, right? And so yeah, I decided to go that way.
So you mentioned dangerous things, and I really want to delve into this. But before we do, can you actually let us know, like, what inspired you with the name Dangerous Things? And I will say,
Yeah.
I'll make a guess before you explain, just because I
Sure.
want to see if I'm going to get it right.
Yeah.
There's one post in your social media that's a quote, I believe, and I'm going to read it out loud.
Mm.
It is the business of the future to be dangerous, and it is among the merits of science that it equips the future for its duties. Is that the reason, or does it have to do with that somehow, something?
That was a very serendipitous thing, that a quote that came together. No, the real reason is much more mundane. I I got all this media hype after doing the first install in 2005, and I got my first like hate mail as well, which was just basically this woman sent. I think it was a woman. It was from a email address that thought anyway. So it was like this big font, and it said, "You are the devil's mouthpiece," and that's all it said.
Oh, wow.
And I printed that out and I put it in a frame and put it on my wall. And I thought, oh man, that's funny. So like over time, there's a lot of reaction, a lot of it visceral, right? Where people are just like, this is dangerous, and what are you doing, and all this stuff. They didn't really get it or understand it. And so I was like, well, I'm going to be selling microchip implants for humans, and um, I think it's hilarious because for one, if I called it Safe Things,
Yeah,
it would not impact who would be buying this, right? Like
that's
whoever's
true.
going to buy this, it wouldn't matter if it was called Safe Things or Dangerous Things. And so I was like, well, it does, so the name doesn't really matter, but it feels like this is like literally bleeding edge technology for people to adopt. And so I was like, we'll just go with that. Like we'll just say,
Mhm.
hey, these are dangerous things. Ooh, your grandma's going to be
I
upset,
actually just
right?
love this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, we'll call it dangerous thing. So I think the first iteration was dangerous thing, and then like .gs because I couldn't get the .com, and then I think a little bit later I made an offer on the domain, and they wanted like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and I was like, how about 2,000? And they were like, all right.
Okay.
So I bought it for a couple grand, and then yeah, that was we're off and running. So
Awesome. I love this. And in I believe it's one of the slogans. It's biohack the planet. Just give us a little brief for our listeners. What does that actually mean? Or like, where were you going with that?
yeah, so I think that particular little quote was borrowed. So there was all these biohacking kind of events that had cropped up, and some of them are no longer occurring, or they're defunct. But one of them was, it was a saying, I think, that somebody had said. I'm pretty sure it was Josiah Zahner who said that, and then he created an event after that. So there's actually an event called Biohack the Planet. And so he had posted it on something, I think, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And so I said, yeah, Biohack the Planet. And I put it on the bottom of the thing, of the website, just in the corner, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was because you have your website, the name, and then you kind of have your little tagline or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the tagline is for Dangerous Things is, custom gadgetry for the discerning biohacker, right? Like like that's the tagline. But in the bottom where we're doing like talking about shipping, and like people are like, do you sell to Canada? Do you sell to the Netherlands? Like because it's such a strange concept for some people that they could just buy a human implant microchip online, they just question, like, could I even have it shipped to me, right? Like, so I put the first line was, something about like, located in Seattle, shipped globally, biohack the planet, like trying to be like, this is accessible, this is democratized, you can buy it for cheap and we'll send it to you and it'll be fine. So outside of a few countries where we just can't ship to, Turkey being one of them, actually, because the customs people opened the first box we ever shipped there and they're like, nope. And so they anything coming from like Dangerous Things or DT LLC or anything, they grab that. So not allowed. But yeah.
Okay, I want to delve into the details now, because I'm sure a lot of the listeners either may have never heard about implantables, or if they have, they may not understand like what the actual process is. And I can share my first experience was like a live implantation of implantables, and that was at two conferences. That was Body Hacks at the time, if you remember it. That was in 2019 in Austin, and then of course at DEF CON, which is like considered one of the largest hacking conventions, and you have representatives from Dangerous Things that go, and Vivo-Key, which by the way we need to do a parenthesis as to the differences between the two.
Oh sure, yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we could talk about that. But yeah, again, just like for the listeners, what is the actual process? Like, what do we mean when we say democratized implantables? And like logistically, right? Like, say I want an implant tomorrow. Like, what are the steps? What can I do? And what does it entail?
Yeah, so well, let's just start with the idea of democratizing access, right? So one of the things that I find very intriguing about the world we're living in today, and even the world of 2013, is that the internet and information and connectivity and all of that is coalesced to create an environment where literally a guy operating out of his garage can manufacture through factories and whatnot, can manufacture a totally safe, totally viable human implant, right, a microchip implant. And that's just fascinating to me, because the understanding is, at least like the purview of implants, people think like, well, it has to be some kind of big, huge medical company or like a special university lab with all this, millions of dollars of equipment, and that's got to be like how this works. And so the idea that no, you can totally have a non-medical device, and we can get into like the FDA's definition of medical device.
Oh yeah, our favorite subject.
Yeah, so you can have this totally like workable, functional implant, and it doesn't have to be this expensive medical procedure and things, right? So for example, we work with body piercers in our professional network because it's we try to say it's functional body jewelry. It's like it goes under the dermis.
Oh, I love that.
Put in with a needle, right?
That's the first time I hear it, actually, Amal. What? I know you for years. I love that.
So okay. It's because when you're thinking like, okay, medical devices, like that's the FDA has a very specific definition for those things, and there's three things. If your device does any of those things, it's considered a medical device, and you have to get PMA, pre-market authorization, and blah blah blah. So the first big one is it used in the diagnosis or treatment of disease? Well, our stuff, no. Like if we were to put medical records on there, and if we were to try to say you can identify a patient using this technology, then the answer would be yes, and it would be a medical device, and they'd have to get approval, or we would. The other thing is, does it elute drugs? No. Does it fundamentally change the structure of the body? Like, is the intent of it, like a breast implant, meant to change the structure of the body? No. And so it doesn't tick any of the boxes, so we don't have to do that. Now, could we have? Absolutely, we could have gone to the FDA and gotten approval already. In fact, there's already class 2 devices for in this range that we could file and say it's similar to and get approval. But the problem with that is that regulatorily and realistically, getting FDA approval makes it a medical device, and so that means that body piercers are not allowed to work with it, right? So it omits that option, and so now you're faced with this thing. It's like, if you have this FDA approved device, like body jewelry is not FDA approved, and for good reason, right? But if you have this FDA approved device, now have to go to doctors and convince them to do this thing, and it's usually going to be a one-off for the doctor, and they're going to be putting their practice at risk, and all the stuff, the reasons that we don't work with doctors anyway. But when you go to the doctor, you don't sign a waiver, right? It's not how it works. And so they're supposed to be the expert, and so they don't want to put their medical insurance at risk or whatever. But then you go to a body piercing shop, the first thing you do is sign a waiver. It's like, yeah, the piercer's going to do their best. You could get an infection because you might walk away and like infect the area. So the whole premise is set up differently. The body piercer is immediately kind of indemnifying themselves for the action. It's like, we're going to do a good, clean job here in my licensed bonded studio. And for them, if you get an ear piercing, this is again, I'm kind of meandering here, but an ear piercing is actually more risky health-wise than getting an implant, because you have this piece of metal that's going through your body, not just under the skin. And then your body has to try to heal around this piece of metal for days and days, and sometimes weeks. The whole time, that open wound is at risk of it getting infected, of having like keloid scarring, that kind of stuff. And so that's why the piercer has to have the waiver, because they can't control what you do when you leave. You can immediately infect it, right? And so they might have done a great job, but then you mess it up. And so you sign this waiver. And in the case of a implant, a microchip implant, you tent the skin, you pull the skin up, and you put the needle into the dermal layer between, the fascia tissue, basically between dermis and muscle. You eject the chip from the tube, and it just lays there. You remove the needle, and now you just put a Band-Aid over it, and you're done, right? So that incision site is just like a needle prick, basically, comparatively to like putting something through and hanging a piece of metal. And then after it heals, even just getting a scab on it a few hours later, your risk of infection goes to almost nothing at that point. And so,
and I imagine like the healing times substantially shorter than like a piercing. And then would you say, again, this is literally for the listeners, would you say that it, like the prick is kind of like we get blood tests all the time? Is it a similar sensation?
I would say it's very similar. It's somewhere between that, depending on where you're getting it too, because like the back of the hand is low density nerve endings. Some people want to do other things, and so it just really depends. But somewhere between getting blood drawn and like a bee sting, right? But it's over and done in seconds, and yeah.
Oh yeah, I was like, again, going back to the conference, just to allow the listeners to like live it through my like first experience. It was like done and dusted. They must have they churned out like hundreds, like in the span of like the conference duration. So it's really quite a fast process. What I wanted to touch upon, and I know we've deviated a little bit, and we'll go back to the previous questions, is what you mentioned, the tingling sensation, and I think you know where I'm going with this. So far we kind of spoke about like functional reasons for the implants, but those aren't the only types of implants that people can get. Can you talk a bit about the other ones?
Sure. So
I think you know which ones I mean.
Yeah, so we have a couple different options, and I'll just say briefly that some of them do have lights, so they light up when you read them. Some of the energy from the reader will talk to the chip, but also make little blinky lights and things. So those are cool, which is why people might put them in slightly different areas. They want to have some kind of decorative function as well. But then there's the magnet implants, and so magnet implants are just what they sound like. It's a magnet that's bioproofed in some way, so there's an encapsulation, and then that's implanted. And typically those are put into fingertips or other areas of the body with very high nerve ending density. And the reason for that is that what you're doing is you're hijacking one sense, that's the tactile sense, to create awareness of another sense. And so if you have a small magnet and it's in an area of the body like a fingertip where there's very high nerve endings, whenever you encounter a magnetic field or another magnet or an electromagnetic field that's of sufficient strength, that magnet, a tiny magnet implant, will move. And then if the field is alternating, like let's say it's an electric motor, then there's the field is modulated, right? So then the magnet will vibrate. And that creates a sensation, obviously, in the nearby nerve endings, and that gives you a sense that you are experiencing a magnetic field that you would otherwise not be able to detect. I'll give you an example of how this works, which is really cool because brain plasticity is the key component here. So when
Yeah.
you are just walking around in your daily life, if you felt a little buzzing, tingling sensation in your pinky finger, you would look at your finger and try to figure out what the hell's going on, right? But over a very short amount of time, your brain will start to rewire what that little sensation, that little specific part of your body means. And that was made very clear to me when I had my magnet implant on my pinky finger in my left hand, and I was doing my thing and exploring magnetic fields, kind of like you hold up your hand to a microwave oven, and you feel it working and you feel it operating, and like, okay, that's cool. But after a few weeks of playing around, I think it was literally just 2 weeks playing around with it. It kind of got almost boring, right? Like it's like, yeah, magnetic fields, but it was an ambient awareness now of certain magnetic fields. Sometimes I'd be surprised, like I'd be like, oh geez, like that thing has a really strong magnetic field I didn't even know about. Some people would be surprised when they're walking around like a big city and there's like a subway that goes by. You would never even know it, but the magnetic field transitions through the area and the magnet goes nuts and like, whoa, what was that, right? It's like they're able to detect things.
You're
Yeah.
essentially developing like a new sense, right?
Exactly, but by hijacking part of an old one, right? And so we do that all the time. Like the alarm on your phone, the beeping, the audio, the visual cues. We do that all the time. We hijack these existing senses to get more data in, and so that's what we do here. And when I was kind of bored of it, I happened to walk into the local library, and you walk through the little anti-theft gate, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's old school. It's called bit tag technology, and there's like a little piece of metal in the book, and if it's magnetized, it vibrates, and the gates can sense that vibration, and it goes off. So I walk through the gate, my finger goes nuts, like it went nuts, and so I immediately stopped. I was like, ooh, and I kind of looked around, and I was like, oh, it's
it
the
doesn't
gate.
look suspicious at all to someone else.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, it's the gate thing. And then I walked in the library. But what I realized, I walked in the library and I sat down. I'm like, wait a minute, that was a really interesting reaction, because what I did was I sensed it, I felt it, and then I looked around immediately as a reaction. I didn't look at my finger because my brain had already rewired. If this little part right here is buzzing, making a weird sensation, that means something about the environment around me, not there's something going on with my finger.
Right.
To the point where
Cool.
my reaction was that. It wasn't like I had to think about it, like, oh, my finger's buzzing. Oh, I'm looking around. It was an immediate like, whoa, like a fear reaction. So even the deep rooted like understanding that your brain has about its sensory input and what it means was reprogrammed at the subconscious level, right? And because my conscious level only realized that after the fact. And so I found that to be super, super fascinating. That's totally a viable way to literally create a new sense by hijacking a small amount of another one. So
almost it's superhero-y, if that's a word.
Yeah. I mean, I try to shy away from the idea of like superpowers or whatever, but this is the root of what we're talking about when we talk about biohacking in a kind of like a cybernetic context, is that none of these products directly interact with biology. Like a cybernetic implant, you think of like, oh, it's like some kind of thing that like works with your biology, and in all, for all intents and purposes, it's not like that at all. The magnets are probably the closest thing, because the intent and purpose of them is to activate nearby neurons, but it's not like we're talking directly with neurons, we're interacting, brain computer interfaces or anything like that. But it does have a fundamental difference between tool use and what we're doing here. If you were to like pick up a phone, you're using a tool, you're like superhuman because you have access to everything and the internet, and like by extension, your capabilities as a human being is vastly, dramatically changed, right? But you wouldn't say that you are capable of that thing, and if if somebody stole your phone, you just get another one, and whatever. It's not it's a tool. And so there's a kind of a fundamental difference, though, I think, and philosophically and psychologically, when you implant or integrate these things into yourself. it's the best way that I can really describe it, or really put it in terms that are understandable by people that don't have these implants, is how we consider tools themselves. And so I'll give this example in the context of, let's say you are talking with somebody who has a prosthetic arm, right? If you're talking to them and the prosthetic arm is in the case, and the case is over here, right? And you go over to the case and you pick the arm out of the case and you break it, like just snap it in half, right? With your superhuman strength. Would you consider that to be property damage or assault, right? So that's like the first rhetorical question. Then the next level is, okay, let's say they are wearing the prosthetic, and then you walk over to the prosthetic, and without any kind of physical interaction that harms their biological body, but they're wearing their prosthetic arm, and then you break it, right? Is that assault or is it property damage? And I think the difference between those two scenarios, there's a clear difference, right? Most people would say property damage to the arm in the box thing, but once it's a functional part of the body, that changes things. And so, you know, nobody would say a phone is a functional part of the body, right? Because it's just a phone and it's meant to be put down. It's meant to be separate from you. Whereas an arm is meant to be integrated as part of what you're now capable of as a human. It's a functional part of your body. And these implants are the same way. So magnetic implants, chip implants that allow you to communicate with readers and computers and whatnot, they're permanent. There's an expectation of permanence. I mean, you can remove them just like anything and replace them and whatnot, but there is an expectation of permanence. There's an expectation of reliable functionality, right? And there's a minimal amount of management or friction in having them and using them. So in those ways, for the user and for the people external to them, it's for all intents and purposes part of their personality or their capabilities as human beings, part of them. And so, you know, when we extend into things like, if I were to attack the prosthetic because it has a Bluetooth radio and now I can hack it and like disable it, is that the same as physically breaking it? It's no longer functional, right? It doesn't function for them in their intended purpose when they're trying to use it. You know, so these are the questions that kind of are you know, worth talking about in terms of how to consider these devices and what they're doing in the realm of biohacking.
How many implants do you have, Amal?
Oh, right now I think I have 8.
Oh wow! Are they all some magnetic, some RF?
Well, no, I don't have any magnetic implants anymore. My one magnetic implant, which was an early prototype, I had that removed after about a year. And then I just never was compelled to replace it. And there's some things about having a magnet implant as well. Like when you, so at the time I was doing a lot of like kind of traveling around, and I would be walking around cities and I need to like navigate. And when you're holding a phone with a magnet implant, the compass in the phone goes all crazy. So I'm like trying to figure out which direction I need to go, and it's saying I'm walking this way, but I'm walking that way, and it's like, oh, it's because I'm holding it with my hand that has a magnet implant, so it's throwing off all the stuff. There's other things you can do with an implant too, a magnet implant, like you know, when you're using your laptop and it has a lid closure sensor, usually those are like Hall effect sensors, which sense the magnets in the lid. And so like I'd be typing and then I put my finger over, you know, an area and it turns off the screen. It's not that it was a pain in the ass. That was actually kind of cool because then I could like have a quick way to be like, if somebody came over my shoulder, I could just blank the screen. Yeah. What do you need? Okay. And then take my finger off and keep going. So that's some cool aspects to it. But so the rest of them are just different RFID implants. Some of them are prototypes. Some of them are just, I wanted redundancy on both sides of my hands, right? So depending on what kind of door that I'm reaching for or whatever, I might use this one, and it might be the same implant on both sides, but it's now I have, you know,
Well, it's the
I can
same.
choose.
I can see why that redundancy sometimes is useful because I think even with my phone, when I want to unlock it with my fingerprint, I mean, you don't always hold the phone on the same
Right.
side, so you kind of want like multiple fingers to unlock your phone.
Exactly.
Just to so from my understanding, basically you can order the chip from your website and then go to your local kind of ear piercer tattoo artist, and that's how, and they can help with the procedure, right? There
Yeah.
is that correct? There's and I think this was like in the early days, of course. We could literally just brush upon it, but it doesn't basically have to be self experimentation, which was like the first um way that these implants were being done at the start, at least, because biohackers were also trying to navigate kind of what's allowed and what we can or cannot do. I'm just
Yeah.
mentioning
Yeah.
briefly like Left Anonyms, for example,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
public blogs on her experiments.
So when we
But
started too, we were doing the same thing. So the two things that Dangerous Things was supposed to do is one, make sure the things that we sold were like tested and safe, because there's a lot of stuff you can just get off like AliExpress that's just like a nightmare.
oh,
It's not safe at all. And but to be fair, a lot of those things are actually meant to be put into industrial uses. So for example, many car keys have these little glass tubes that look just like a pet implant, right? But they're
mhm,
totally not safe for implantation. They're meant to be put into car keys, of all things, for the immobilizer, right? And
mhm.
so, but people were starting to source these things and like then put them in their body all haphazardly, and some with some pretty ill effects. So the two things were safe. We're selling safe stuff, tested and good, and we're providing safe installation procedures and ways to do it. And so we first started out with a DIY guide that lasted about 2 months, because I was unaware just how hard it is to follow procedure. Right? Like
Mm,
people would be super excited or they would be nervous and they wouldn't read and then they would just do things and it would be terrible.
just
And
here,
so,
because I completely understand what you're saying.
yeah.
So the best, and I'll send you this video after this call, and I'll probably share it when we publish this episode. But the best way to describe the actual difficulty of like writing instructions that will be followed as you expect them to be followed is this. So there's a video with a dad and like his son and his daughter. They're like young, I think like 10, 13. I can't imagine that they're any older. And he instructs his children to tell him how to create or make a peanut butter and J sandwich, right? Which is like
Mm,
so intuitive, and we know exactly how to make it. Uh, but the effort that was going through both of the kids, like saying, okay, put the peanut butter on the bread slice, and you'd see the dad take those words literally and like literally take the jar of peanut butter
yeah.
and put it on the slice of bread. So
Yeah.
just a funny example to like help our listeners understand how difficult it is to actually construct instructions that will be followed but by the user that hasn't ever done the thing that you're telling them to do, right?
Yeah. There's definitely a whole challenge there. Like that's even with like good experiment design and science, that's really hard.
Mm.
But in this case, it was definitely not the instructions,
Okay.
because it was a very thick packet with pictures and everything. Like it was like
Right.
do these things in this order, and the instructions were very thorough. But the problem was that even if you could explain like the big challenges were things like cross contamination, right? So you're like, do not touch this part of like don't touch any part of it, only hold it by the corners, the drape down,
Mm-hmm.
then you're creating a field, right? This whole thing is not to be touched because that will contaminate the surface, right? So you can write all that out, but it's easily forgotten because it's not doctrine, right? So I've literally seen where they do that, they lay it out and then they flatten it out with their hands. They touch every part of the surface with
Oh
their hands to
no.
flatten it out. I'm like, you just contaminated 100% of the surface, right? Like they're not thinking through the words they just read, right? So they follow the instruction, but then they do their own like thing to it. So they've seen that, and other things like when you have the sterile field, when you open the packet, right, it peels apart into two pieces. So you open it, and so that it drops without being touched, it drops onto the sterile field. So you're not contaminating it, you're not pulling it out of the package, contaminating everything, right? And so, people would like open the thing and then put their dirty fingers in there and grab it out of there and throw it on the thing. I'm like, okay, like it clearly says not to do that, but people are not trained in this kind of thing. And so it just became extremely clear extremely quickly, this is bad. This is not fulfilling the second premise of why I started this company. So what do we need to do? And then, we started talking to body piercers who clearly handle aseptic procedure and skin and needles. And it was like, this is the way to go. So rip the thing down. And then I created a short guide just for professionals. And then we send that to professionals, started building a network so that we could send people
so
there.
you have a network like globally, basically, of practitioners.
Yeah. But we can't cover everywhere. So if you don't have somebody, we have a guide, but the guide is for the customer to approach a professional, not a guide for how to do it. So generally speaking, they'll go, oh, well, I can't find a professional on the map, so I'll call every single body piercer in a 20-mile radius, right? And what are they going to get? They're going to get no's, because the body piercer is like some random crazy person wants a microchip implant and they're just asking on the phone if they can come in and have it done. No, like they're not going to risk their business and whatever. So the guide for customers is print this guide out for one, go in person with these documents, and the documents just explain what the products are, explain the materials, like explain that we have other piercers and we'll work with the piercer, right, to get familiar with procedure. All that, to go in person with these, hand the documents over, explain what you want to do, leave, because they're going to have to mull it over, right? So give them some time to think about it, and then reapproach and say, we're going to go for this. So if you follow the guide for approaching professionals, then it's like a 90% yes, right? But yeah, if you just email or call around, it's going to be 100% no.
No, I really yeah, I love the approach, and of course that's, as you said, you came through learning, right? You said you did try it the first 2 months and then realized that's not going to work. But you not only kind of startup terms like pivoted in that sense, but you also provided the guide for the practitioners, but also technical support. I was like stalking your YouTube channel and on dangerous things. It's great following and great kind of like structure tutorials and everything. Again, I'll add all these links to the podcast. And we should also say that it's not only implantables that you have on your website. You have other kind of various products. One, and again, it doesn't have to have like so much attention because I have so many questions that I want us to touch. But one of the things that you do have there is also a should I call it a smart ring? But it's called Magic Ring. On your website. I'm sure some of the listeners might be like into biohacking from the spectrum, like the health side of things. So they might know what an Oura is. Do you want to kind of relate, what your ring does, which is, it's not an Oura, but it has a different functionality that may be interesting for our listeners.
Sure. So the dangerous things, and the fact that we work with primarily RFID transponders, that means that there's two circles that we overlap in like a Venn diagram. So one is biohacking, right, because it's implants. The other one is RFID technology and what you can do with all that. And so the ring addresses this clear RFID circle, because let's say you have a work badge or a key fob for your parking garage or your apartment complex or whatever, and you just don't like the fob. You don't like this stupid dangly fob thing. You want to be able to have something more cool, right? So in a lot of cases, you can. The Magic Ring has two chips inside, two RFID chips. One is for low frequency, 125 kilohertz, and one is for high frequency, 13.56. And within those frequency ranges and families, there are a ton of different chip types. And so the interesting thing is that legacy-wise, there's a ton of these apartment complexes and fobs and things that are totally using this super cheap technology, and you can essentially copy that ID from the fob into the Magic Ring in either one of the two chips. And so we just sell the ring for people that are interested in doing that and being able to like beat their way through with just a piece of jewelry rather than like a dangly key fob they have to have on their keychain, but they're not quite ready to make the jump into implants, right? So the magic ring is more of like an introduction to doing this kind of RFID hacking, right?
Yeah. And okay, again, briefly before we go into Vivo Key, because I think that's our next thing, is can you talk about, so in terms of adoption, there was like, and I'm sure some of our listeners will have seen it in the news. You know what I'm talking about. Sweden, 4,000 employees
Sure,
get
yeah.
implantables. Do you want to talk to us about that
Mhm.
whole thing and perhaps how it relates, because this is your industry, right? Like, what did
Yeah, yeah.
that mean for dangerous things
Yeah.
and Vivo Key?
So the thing that really, to say anything about that, is really I've learned a lot about media and how media works.
Yes.
And so a lot of it is hyperbolic, right? It was like a handful of people that did it for the purpose of being in media, right? And so but that story kept recycling every year, about every 9 months actually. It would recycle, like all of Sweden's getting implants. And it was like, it was
Was it a
really
different
just,
number each time too?
no, it was always like
Is it?
4,000, or but it was the same exact news thing, and it would just recycle every few months, like it comes around, right? And so the inaccuracies in reporting are huge, because typically they want to write a story that's going to grab eyeballs, and they already have their story written pretty much, and they may omit or intentionally change details. I've had that happen a lot as well. And so, when you're talking to a reporter or somebody about the technology, and you're like, well, it could be used for payments, it could be used for all these things. There are huge policy and political and fundamentally, like, challenging things about making it work for that, because you have to work with the powers that be. You have to integrate your business solution into their models. You have to get people convinced that this is a good thing to do from a business perspective. So um, the gulf between, it could be used for payments, it could be used for medical records, it could be used for these things, and actually doing those things is huge, right? And so the problem always is people. It's never the technology. Like, literally, the Vivo key chips, we'll get into it, they can do payments, they can do medical record storage, they can do all those things securely and totally efficiently and effectively. But the powers that be in each of these realms, there are huge, vast considerations that just are currently blocking those applications. And so, but reporters don't want to hear that. They just hear, oh, you can do payments, you can do this. And they will either like willingly omit the fact that this is not actually occurring yet, and they'll just say, you can get a chip implant, they'll do all these things, right? And so that proliferates. And so the Sweden thing was like, everybody's getting them. This huge company did all this stuff. You can use it for payments, you can use it for this. Like, that was literally in the report. Like, you can, all of Sweden's going cashless, and you can use chip implants to pay for everything, and everybody's got one. Like, the reality, the gulf between the reality and what that article was purporting is huge, right? But that nobody, it doesn't seem to matter much in the zeitgeist, right? And I'll give an example. So we were working on this prototype implant for doing payments in 2018, and I was in London and bopping around and tapping payment instruments, right, the terminals, and testing it. And it was just a little chip in a little like baggie, right? And I'm like testing it. And the last day that was in London, we went to this cafe, and I said, oh, I'm going to test it here because I got a weird terminal. And so I put, they said it's going to be, 10 pounds, 50 or whatever. So I'm all right. So I put the chip implant to the little terminal, and it, beeps and everything. I'm kind of recording it kind of surreptitiously, and boop, it beeps. And the guy behind the counter goes, oh, what's that? And I kind of showed it to him. He goes, oh, is that one of those chip implants for making payments? And I'm like, what are you, from the future? Like, yeah, but like, this is like not even working yet. I mean, testing the performance, like, it's not even tied to a payment account. Like, what are you even talking about?
Like, are you even real, or am I hallucinating?
Yeah. So, but it was a clear example of how the media had already over-reported the idea that chip implants can be used for payment. That the guy working the coffee bar was like, oh, it's a chip implant for doing payments. I know all about those, right? Like it had already permeated the public consciousness before it's even a reality, right? So, yeah, yeah.
I mean, okay, yeah, I completely feel you on this, and but it can work on your side, I guess, at some point.
Absolutely.
And
I mean, there's there's definitely pros and cons to that.
Pros and cons, exactly.
Yeah.
And the media is a beast. Let's not get into that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned two things. I think this is a great time to start talking about Vivo-Key, and then very neatly going into like payments. And if you're willing to share, because I'm we didn't have like a proper conversation before this. I kind of like put you in the deep. Maybe you can also talk about your experiences, kind of like sweat and tears, to be honest, with certain what did you call them? The big giants in the payments industry?
Sure, yeah.
But one thing I'll say
the
is
major
that
players, yeah.
Yeah, the major players, exactly, because you got close, and then anyway. So also to listeners, please check out Vivo-Key website. I absolutely love it. The quote that I love: "The key to your digital future." And so with that, I'm going to leave it to you to explain what Vivo-Key is.
All right. So in 2013, I started Dangerous Things, and then as things progressed, the type of customer that was coming to the website started to change. And so initially, it was very kind of technical customers. They were like, "Oh, where's the data sheet? And do you have any code samples for this reader? And I want to whatever." And then over time, it started to be like, "Oh, these are interesting. What kind of cool things can I do with it?" Right? A much more general customer, right? And so by 2017, 2016, 17, 18, it was becoming this this very much like we want these implants, or we think implants are cool, like the general public was coming and buying them, but we want to be able to do things without having to like piece together our own readers and like solder stuff and like do that kind of stuff. So it became clear to me that to make use of broader scope applications, so regular RFID transponders and Dangerous Things stuff, that's more personal scope applications, meaning your car, your door, your computer. You can kind of control your environment to work with the chip, right? Modify things as you need. The larger scope stuff is making payments, authenticating yourself online through standards-based authentication, nothing special, but just being able to do that. And then maybe even exploring other things like travel documents, government IDs, things that are also standardized on these smart card platforms. And so, Vivo-Key
sorry
was...
to interrupt you, but how cool is that? It's like those like gates, right? When you cross the border, the passport, and even the passport scanners are kind of futuristic, but what if that whole blocky thing that takes space wasn't there, and it was just like, whoop, you like touch a pad with your chip?
Yeah. So this is the thing. Like your identity is broken up against all these tokens, right? So you have a passport for this, you have a driver's license for this, you have a key fob for your apartment, you have a YubiKey, security token for your authentication. You have a bank card for your payments. You have a thing. You have metal keys on your key ring. Each one of them is some kind of security token that represents you to some system, right? Mechanical, physical, or digital. And so consolidating all those things and keeping them under your control is kind of the point of Vivo-Key. And so being able to leverage secure products, like regular RFID transponders are not really designed to be secure. They're just designed to be cheap and work, right? So Vivo-Key is focused exclusively on bringing secure products to the market so that you could still have your personal scope, your door, your car, your computer, but also we could explore these larger applications, and there would be the security to enable those applications to exist, right? So Vivo-Key started with the idea of putting a smart card platform, which is a special kind of microchip. It's meant for secure applications. It's the ones that are in passports. It's the ones that are in secure smart cards, and making that implantable. And so we started down that road, and we partnered with a company called Fidesmo to do that, because Fidesmo had the deployment platform already in existence. So they could deploy smart card applications like a Bitcoin wallet or a access token, or whatever the application needs to be deployed over the air. Well, with the chip that we started with, turned out to have a hardware bug that was okay for cards, because you just throw the card away, but not for implants. And so most of these smart cards, you program everything and then you lock it down like a bank card. A payment card has the same smart card platform chip. you lock it all down and you send it out, right? And so it just does the payments and that's it, and that's fine. But the beauty of Fidesmo's system and what we were trying to build is that you could deploy applications at will, right? So in the field, you could say, I want this now to have a Bitcoin wallet deployed. And so making those chips open for changes was not really part of the plan for the smart card chip maker, NXP. They made this little smart card silicon chip. And so if you were deploying an application and there was a problem with the communication in the middle of it, the chip would just stop working. And so we're like, well, that sucks. So they're like, yeah, that does suck. So they said, well, we'll do the next version, the P60. So that was the P40 chip. And the P60, we'll fix that problem. So the P60, I said, okay, when's that going to come out? And they said 2 years. Like, oh boy, okay. So then VivoKey started working on the Spark platform and a whole different identity platform while we waited. And so then the P60 rolled around and we're like, great. So we did prototypes, we did some testing, and then we rolled it out in a beta, public beta, and then we closed the beta, and then we started having people use it. And then one of our users found a different bug, which we submitted, and NXP was like, oh, we weren't aware of that. So now they had to fix a new bug in this thing, and they're like, well, so like, what do we do? And they said, well, you got to wait for the next one. so like another 2 years. And we're like, no, yeah. And then that was like, there was pandemic times and all this stuff. And so it was just kind of a big nightmare. But now we are at the stage where we have the correct chip. That chip is now in an implantable form factor called Apex Flex. It's also in a ring wearable form factor, Apex Ring, which is being spun out actually with a whole different company. To take the wearable side to the market. And so that, yeah. And then we have,
is that because on your Twitter profile, and then I thought maybe my arithmetic is not great, but I think specifically in your Twitter profile, you say dangerous things, VivoKey, and then something else, but you don't specify what it is, or like you have three projects you're working on, and so alluding to one more project but not really announcing it yet. Is that because you haven't launched yet, and are you referring to the wearables?
It's in the works, yeah. So right now, okay. I mean, the company is formed, and we're working on getting the website launched, but it's the company is called Cybernetic, and we're launching the wearables and potentially some implantables under that company. So VivoKey is transitioning now into a development house and IP holding company. So if you look at the current VivoKey website today, some of the wording has changed. And so it's really about providing partner companies with technologies that enable their products in a smart way. So we actually have a different client in Italy is making wearables of a different, like a kind of stylish wristbands and things. So we're going to be providing VivoKey enabled products for payment and access and everything to those like wearables makers. We're also doing licensing. So there are other smart card platform products that could benefit from using some of our applications we've developed. So we are licensing those as well. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting shift. But the point again is that through launching a wearable option, we can establish inroads, because, and this is where we're going to touch on payment. The way payment works, it really has nothing to do with your bank, right? And maybe in the EU, it's a little bit more to do with your bank if you're using like PSD2 or use some kind of bank-to-bank transfer. But all the point-of-sale stuff for like MasterCard, Visa, the payment card networks, right? So they are their own thing, and they exist outside of banks. So the processors and the card networks, they are kind of a hierarchy of their own. Like MasterCard owns their network, right, top to bottom. Visa owns their network, top to bottom. There's the standard called EMV, which they've got together, Eurocard, MasterCard, and Visa. They got together to make a standard so that you didn't need 3 terminals at the point of sale, one for MasterCard, one for Visa. But when it comes to using products on their networks, it's totally their own domain. So if we go to MasterCard and say, hey, we want to enable the payment features, which are totally technically working, right, on this, and we want to have an implant that works with your payment network and processors and stuff, we have to get permission. Right, and so all the big players, they are really terrified of the idea of implants. They do not want the public to have a reaction and say, MasterCard is working to make the doomsday government spy chip implants, a reality. Like they really do fear that reaction, that backlash from the public, and like a drop in their stock price is really what it amounts to. They just don't want to see that happen, and so they fight it kind of tooth and nail about that. And
But
so,
so do you think, I mean, you presumably have like a strong customer base, and you've kind of, shown and proven that there are that it meets a demand. Was that, could you elaborate, like how are the dealings with the big kind
yeah.
of companies in this space, and why? Because surely they're diversifying and they're inclusive of the individuals that see a functionality for implantables.
Yeah, but it's nowhere in comparison to. So, for example, let's say I had 1 billion people that wanted a payment implant, 1 billion, right? Like all of India and then some, right? Like it just, let's say I want a payment implant. Well, um, a, it's not like they are unable to get a Mastercard device already, right? So we're not bringing new customers, right? Um, when MasterCard faces something like that, where they're like saying, okay, well, we could enable new interesting things, but like, what does that really bring us monetarily? In this instance, not much, right? Um, Inversely, if we have a market capitalization of X, right? Let's say it's like 29 billion, right? If our stock price goes down 1% because the general public has this outcry that we're like enabling the devil chip, right? Then we've lost, and this is all the fallacy of financial markets, but we've lost, quote unquote, value of $1 billion or whatever.
Mhm.
So for them, the potential losses, like and losses, and this is again just ridiculous. The stock price goes down, and then like you say, oh well, it's worth less, the company's worth less, so we lost, quote unquote, money. It's made up, it's BS, but whatever, it's the world we live in. And so you can't compare potential loss of value with what a meager amount of revenue generation. Like it doesn't equate. And so that's where we are, right? So what happens is we end up endlessly talking to people within MasterCard, Visa, and these card networks, and even banks, issuers who are interested in pursuing it. But they're at the lower level. They're at the marketing level. They're at the like, this would be cool level. Then inevitably that filters up to the people that make the ultimate decisions. And those people have they don't care if it's cool or not. They're just like, am I going to get fired because we lost the company $1 billion? Am I going to get a promotion because I brought this cool project, right? And they inevitably say no, like all the time, every time. And so it's not really something that's going to be viable, in my opinion, in a card network scenario in the near future. What might be possible is doing something like PSD2, where in Europe they've mandated that banks need to be able to pay banks, circumventing the card payment network. So it's by law, there needs to be this platform for allowing people to send money directly to each other in a convenient and standardized way through APIs. And that's very forward looking for the EU. So in that scenario, we could come in and create a system for doing that. But it's going to be fought tooth and nail by the card networks who want to maintain control over the point of sale interactions. And it's going to be a pain for merchants because they would have to have a whole nother point of sale system, whole nother terminal for that. And that's not how PSD2 is set up. PSD2 is set up so that you can do it on your phone through a web interface, which works if you're buying a car, because it's a pain. You have to do all this stuff and you have to get all this information, but not if you're buying coffee, right? If you're buying coffee, this nonsense back and forth, I don't know if you've ever even seen it, but it's a nightmare and it's dumb, and it doesn't work for small purchases at the point of sale. It's only for like, I need to send you the $100 that I got to send you, or whatever, and it's
I'm
a
just thinking
process.
in terms of the point of sale, though. I mean, there has been a shift. We've already seen, smart watches and payments through smart watches. I mean, I don't see, it's just an
But
extension.
that's all MasterCard and Visa through the
Mm,
standard networks, right? So their fingers are long. They go into everything. So Apple Pay, Google Pay, all that stuff, all the things you could even imagine ever using at a point of sale, it's all MasterCard Visa. So they've approved every step of that. They're involved in every point of it. And there's just no getting around it at this point. Like there's no legitimate way to do it. There are illegitimate ways of doing it, which is what Dangerous Things does. We offer conversions, right? So there's certain devices that are tap only devices or whatever, and they're conducive for conversion. So the customer will send in their token, whatever it is, a key fob or whatever, and we will pull the chip out of it, put it on a new antenna, encapsulate it as an implant, and send it back to you. And now you have an implant. The downside to a lot of these is
I was wondering, there's a question here. So in the website, there's a photo of you wearing these red glasses, and it says custom services. And I was
exactly.
ask you, what are these custom services? Now I know.
That's one of them. That's one of them. Yeah, exactly. So, but yes, that's exactly it. So, you know, we can do that on the Dangerous Things side. We can do that, and in terms of like breaking the terms of service, the customer is doing that by having us modify their product. So there are scenarios like we had a guy in Australia, his name is Meow, and we converted his travel card for the transit system. And the problem that he ran into is occasionally they send a guy through doing tickets checking, right? So he couldn't present a card, he presented his implant, and he was like, what? And so yeah, it totally checked out. He had bought his transit, but the guy made note of it, and he's like, this is weird. And so then the transit company deactivated that implant. So
I can totally see something similar happening, you know, on TFL here. So here in London, we have TFL, and we have, you know, of course, you know, the Oyster cards, and I mean, I think you could get by, but I could totally see it happening as well here, where like if you can present, unlike DLR or certain trains where you have to show the card. But then again, what they do is they just scan to see that you've scanned through. So technically,
so this is again a people and policy problem, right? So in Australia, he scanned it successfully, but the guy was like, this is not allowed, and then made a note of it, and then the company was like, okay. And they went to court over it too, because he was saying, hey, like I bought my transit, who the hell cares what the card looks like? Like you verified the security. I didn't cheat the system, I didn't get free transit, but you fucked with my implant. And this again touched on the idea that it was part of his body, and the company had kind of deactivated part of it, right? And so it's like his argument, I think, was a little bit weak, because the card is technically the property of the transit company, and that says it on the card, and don't modify it, and blah blah blah. But his argument was, I made it, it's part of me now, and then you reached out and made that inactive and basically like messed with me. And so if he lost, ultimately I think it was a draw. I forget what the outcome was exactly, but it was some sort of draw. Like they kind of admitted, like it wasn't admitted that they did wrong, but they like they let it off, and they gave him back his money or something. I don't know, but anyway, it touched on the subject.
This is a good, I think a similar example, and I'm pretty sure you're aware of this, is with, I think it was in the UK actually that it happened, but it's the Barcelonian artist, I think Neil Harbison, who had the antenna head implant, who could essentially see colors, and the issue there was that he went to get his passport photo, and you know, technically, you know, there were very clear kind of guidelines for the photo, but that device was part of him, and I think in the end they you know, made that exception, but it raises a lot of these questions, which I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts on, like these ethical considerations surrounding transhumanism, biohacking, including, I guess, genetic engineering, and all these implantables. So what role do you see biohacking playing in the future of healthcare? And how do you see it getting integrated, perhaps in the mainstream medical system, if you see it, you know, in your utopia or in your future vision?
Well, let's address that first by addressing the term hack, right? So
Mm,
people have this like negative connotation with the word hack, but what hack really means, if you I did a hack, right? It's it's really just an unconventional approach to something, right? So biohacking is an unconventional approach to biology or biological considerations, right? And so anything that we come up with, any good hack, which is unconventional, which is effective, more effective, and more efficient, or any in somehow in some way better than the convention, then that becomes convention and is no longer a hack, right? So the transition from of a thing, a technology or whatever, from a biohack into convention and being used in the medical system or whatever means that it is graduated. It is no longer a biohack, right? It is now the thing, right? And so that's really the premise: is that biohacking in general is about producing better solutions, right? Better approaches. And so if to always be in the biohacking realm means to always be in the leading edge of things.
mm,
So the idea that you're going to kind of bring biohacking into the mainstream, I don't think that's going to happen. But because the very premise is that you need to be outside of the mainstream to keep things going. What's going to happen is what happens with every kind of innovation is that it's very exciting to work on in the early beginning. It's kind of a hobbled together thing, and but then when it becomes kind of implemented in this kind of corporate mundane way, it's now convention. It's the thing that future biohackers will rally against and try to improve, right? And so that happens with people too. Like they kind of get drug along with their projects, and then they become the thing that they were trying to improve. And so and that's just the evolution of technology in general. So everything's built
I
upon everything else.
Yeah, I love that. So biohacking is only serving its purpose if it's on the edge and ahead of its time.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so if implantables do revolutionize kind of the way we practice medicine, or the way we carry our records, etc., then there will be something else biohacked.
yeah, exactly. It'll move. The hacking part will move on to the next thing, right?
Yeah. I want to take a slight turn in kind of the last few questions that we have time for. So this and we're going that direction, but then I kind of brought in the
Sure.
futures questions a little too soon because I usually leave them at the end. But I wanted to hear from you. So you touched upon security. What's your view in the current state of digital security and
Yeah.
encryption? And how do you see, or what do you see as the biggest challenges facing us in this
Yeah.
area?
So the old school problems of security and digital identity are just things like password management and key management. Key management is like password management, but it's much more complex because, key management, for example, is when somebody has a Bitcoin wallet and they lose the private key and now that wallet is gone because they can no longer transact with it. Key management is somebody securing their entire account, or they're encrypting a bunch of data and they have a private key meant to decrypt it, and they lose the key and now the data is locked forever. So cryptography works and it's powerful, and so key management is a big issue with that. But also digital identity online. If you're using passwords to secure your accounts and they become compromised, you can lose control of your digital identity completely. So we're seeing this consolidation of digital identity on things like phones. I don't like that because it means that now the phone and the company behind the phone, like Apple or Google or whatever, they are the arbiters of your digital identity and not you. And so the idea for VivoKey is that we move those identity tokens and that controllable digital identity into you, right? You are the important thing, not your phone, not Google, who says it's you, right? It's you. And you can prove identity with cryptographic proofs. Like you can use public key encryption, and there's certificates you can do, and there's FIDO applications you can do, and there's things that are in process now that are becoming more standardized. But of course, the companies that are backing the proliferation of some of these, they want to keep it on the phone only, and I really don't like that idea. The phone has become more important now as a digital identity and security device than your wallet. So, or you even, like your physical body, right? And so you ask people, you rather use your wallet or your phone? And people are like, wallet, get rid of it. I don't care. Steal my wallet. I don't care. My phone? Oh God, no. Like, especially if it's unlocked. If you can access somebody's phone, you own their entire lives, really. Even it
Oh,
stretches
absolutely.
beyond digital. Like, it stretches into the physical. Like, I could screw up your mortgage payments. I could, bankrupt you. I could, like, really serious things. And so VivaCute's about that. But now we're facing this like existential issue of, how do you know, you right now, how do you know you're talking to me and not a deep fake of me? You don't.
Mm.
And there's no way for you to know that. And the technology to do this in real time is here today. People are getting fooled already. Like, bank managers were getting fooled to wire millions of dollars with just voice deepfakes, right? Um, Identity in general is going to be upended. And we need a way to be able to verify and validate in a standards based, secure way, um, who it is we're talking to, like who it is that who's posting, who can we trust anything, right? And so that's coming. I mean, I could just be like 10 years from now, you might be talking to somebody who you thought was a real human being who's not, right? For decades, right? And so these are the things that are going to be important going forward. And if VivoKey can provide a way for your biological identity to be merged in a way with your digital, provable digital identity, that you control and you own. It's not an Apple product. It's not, Google doesn't own the key management part of that or anything. Then I think that's a powerful and important thing. And so we're kind of looking to that future to say, can we be part of the solution for that?
Yeah, so would you say, what does okay, this term is an emerging term, and you know what's coming. What does cyber biosecurity then mean to you? Is that where you're taking this, or do you see these as separate things?
Well, I think, cyber biosecurity to me is a bit nebulous. Um, but if I had to define it now, which I do because you asked me, I would say that that it has to do with the again, a cyber bio as a term, cyber bio means exactly what I was just talking about to me anyway, which is our biology and our digital self, our digital identity, our digital existence are merging in a way that, like, those things are becoming they're not mutually exclusive anymore. It's like, my medical records exist online digitally. My biology relies on accurate medical records. My existence as a human to be able to eat my food and transactions in the real world and pay my mortgage and keep the lights on, and like things that impact real actual my biology rely heavily on the digital realm. And so security on the digital side, security in making sure my digitized genetic records aren't being absconded by some company or used to target me for something, ads or otherwise. Like, there's a plethora of things, but security in general, personal security, so many people keep those things in silos. Like, oh, I need to have a bodyguard so I'm
Mm.
personally secure when I'm in this area, or I need locks on my doors to keep me physically secure. But what kind of locks? I mean, these worlds are merging rapidly, and I think an overarching security in terms of, when you ask the question, is something secure? Well, that depends a lot. Like, there's locks on doors, but then there's the hinges on the doors, and can you just walk around the door? Like, you've seen all these things where security means different things depending on what is exactly you're focusing on. So it's a shell game of how to keep things secure and how to implement things securely.
Absolutely. No, that's music to my ears, because I find myself having to define all the terms in terms of security: cyber security, biosecurity, there's digital biology, which also refers sometimes to its security. Um, but okay, so what's this question was going to ask you what you think your 5 to 10 year radar of tech should consist of, and what we should be approaching and what we should be addressing. But you've already mentioned your existential, well, not yours, our existential threat right now. How are you approaching it? What, what are the technologies that you're looking into? Is it a technological approach to kind of address this convergence of technologies, and what does security for tomorrow mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me and for VivoKey, what we're really looking at is how to properly create attestations for people. Like, how do you attest your identity to me right now in this conversation? There's really no way to do that. There's no secure way to do it. I mean, I just have to trust my eyes and my ears and say, yeah, I'm talking to you. But we know that that's no longer viable, right? That's not a viable way of identifying people, at least online. And so being able to have a standards-based way that's secure that everybody can do, basically, to say, I'm going to challenge you with an identity challenge, right? And you need to respond, and I need to verify that in some way. That's a that's a challenge, because like you could try to hold up your driver's license or whatever, but again, I'm trusting the image on screen, and that's no longer trustable. So cryptography is the only way to do it. But to ask the average person to manage a cryptographic key that is literally now going to become the key to their lives, right?
It's a
Is
people
that's the
problem.
premise. It's a people problem. So making sure that that is something that cannot be lost or forgotten or stolen really is the thing. And so in my opinion, that's not a ring, that's not a card in your wallet, that's an implant. So
So
that's the
if you were
plan.
if you were to design a cyber biosecurity survival kit for the apocalypse, your item would be an implantable. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think so. A very capable, implantable, and I would say not apocalypse, but a dystopia, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like how do we get through an era where nothing is verifiable anymore with our eyes and our ears, right? Like that's gonna be the challenge.
Okay, this is the last two questions. So it's 2073, so 50 years from now. Describe our society in 10 words, and I'll help you by keeping count.
Oh man,
Yeah, leave the
10
best for
words.
last. It can be a sentence or it could just be words, right? That describe how society in 50 years.
Man, I would prep people for this one. Let's just say words then. So I'm gonna say
Yeah.
chaotic,
One.
beautiful, stressful,
Chaotic, beautiful, stressful. That's three.
broad.
Is that in terms of technology? Okay, broad.
Just in terms of our reach, that could be we have people living on the moon or Mars. We have morphological freedom, like broad. It's just like the capabilities of humanity are expanded. um yeah, this is a rough one. I'd say hopeful, because
Yeah.
without that there's really not much going on. um
So stressful, broad, beautiful, a little chaotic. I added the
yeah,
little.
chaotic, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think it'd be a
hopeful.
lot of chaos actually. And
Okay.
to focus more on the chaos part, I'm going to add some words like disparate, meaning like I think the number of societies and subcultures and technological diversity is going to be broadened. It's going to be wider than it is now.
Interesting.
And there's going to be blurring of lines. So like augmented, right, is another word I would use. Like different people are going to be using different technologies in different ways. And um, yeah, I just think like different, fundamentally different than what we could even imagine it to be.
Two more. You're doing really well, actually.
Yeah.
So
um,
stressful, broad, beautiful, chaotic, hopeful, disparate, augmented, which I like, and different. So you have
yeah.
two more, and we're done with
I
this
would
hard
say,
question.
yeah, I would say expansive.
How so?
I think in the way that like technology is an empowering force, and I think the diversification of people's expression of self, like I think there's going to be, for example, like digital people, like they are neurally augmented to the point where they are more digital neurons than biological neurons. I think there's going to be people that just eschew all of that and just be like purity now, like human purity. And then, I think there's going to be a lot of stuff. But the other thing that's key and critical, the last word, key and critical for human societies and humanity itself, is curiosity.
Nice.
Without that, we don't really do anything. We're not going anywhere.
That's beautiful. I love that. So stressful, broad, beautiful, chaotic, hopeful, disparate, augmented, different, expansive, but curious.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. I love your society in 2073. Before I let you go, is there a question, knowing the types of guests that we have on our podcast, what is a question you'd like to ask our next guest, not knowing who they are, but that they could potentially be interesting?
What would you have done differently at the start of your work, knowing what you know now?
I love that. I absolutely love that. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Amal. I have to say, I'm like, I feel like we've only touched the surface. I have at least like 10 more questions that I wanted to ask you. So sure. You are going to, there's going to be a part 2 that like, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on. And honestly, right after this call, we're going to schedule our next one because there's just so much more. Thank you so much.
Sure, no problem. We'll see you.
See ya.